do you want to just grab a seat?
Yeah, I'll just drop that.
It's Joseph Reeves.
Exactly. Yeah.
People who don't have their names on their slides.
It's on the next one. I can.
Hello, and welcome to the last Oxford Martin School seminar of the academic year, and indeed of this series. Congratulations for coming to a beautiful, cool room on a very hot and distracting day in Oxford. I promise we'll finish before the important events in Brazil get started in a few hours' time. But I am delighted that you're here. I'm delighted we're here. This is the last of a series of seminars which have covered from all sorts of angles the idea of engaging with a crowd. We started off with a look at the 19th century crowds that helped science, meandered through citizen journalism, talked just a couple of weeks ago with UCL's Extreme Science Unit about what we apparently are calling up science or citizen-led science. But I'm pleased that with this last talk we're coming back to something that's right at the heart of what the Martin School is about. I'm Chris Enter, I'm the co-director of the programme for computational cosmology here, but most of my colleagues in the school focus very firmly on the real problems of the 21st century, and that's what we're going to hear a bit about today. The topic is digital humanitarianism, not the digital humanities, that's something else, and in particular what I think's one of the most impressive projects in this field, the way that OpenStreetMap and that community have come together to provide real assistance that's of use to people on the ground after disasters and in places around the world where such help is necessary. So the good news is that we have a local expert to tell us about this. Our speaker today, by day, is a senior IT manager at Oxford Archaeology. I was going to say by night, but we just described it as a hobby that got out of hand. But has spent time in Indonesia working with OpenStreetMap, and last year was on the board of directors for this important project. So please join me in welcoming Joseph Reeves.
Okay, well, thank you for the introduction, and thank you for coming out to listen to me speak. So I'm speaking Humanitarian OpenStreetMap, representing Humanitarian OpenStreetMap Team. We're a organisation independent from OpenStreetMap, but deeply embedded within it. We do a lot of different things. We provide resources to people that ask for them, basically. But in this talk, I'm going to talk more about how we try and engage with the crowd and how we try and get people to produce sort of mapping resources that other people need. That's my details. If anyone needs to tweet me, I'll tweet you back. So the brief outline of the talk today. To begin with, I'll go over sort of briefly what Humanitarian OpenStreetMap Team is. I'll call ourselves HOP from now because that's a bit of a mouthful. But I'll talk about briefly who we are, what we've done. Then I'm going to spend a bit longer talking about OpenStreetMap itself, because OpenStreetMap is absolutely crucial to what we do. We couldn't be, for example, the Humanitarian map team. We need OpenStreetMap, we need that ecosystem, we need that platform. We are a user group that uses OpenStreetMap. We're part of a sort of a lively ecosystem. So I think it's really important to get across what OpenStreetMap is. Third is the most sort of important of the day. It is talking about how we as HOP use OpenStreetMap, how we use open geographic data, how we use the crowd for our stated aims of crisis response and disaster preparedness. Finally, point 4, looking forward. We do a lot of things as HOP. We could be doing more. We work in a particular way, and arguably we could extend the way we work to deal with different techniques, and importantly I think to bring in more people. So at a seminar about crowdsourcing, I really want to discuss how we might engage with more of the crowd. Before I talk about any of that though, I'd like to talk about myself, not just because I enjoy it, but because the point is I want to get across that I've worked with HOT, I've been a member of HOT for a long time, but the important thing is I regard myself as a non-expert. I'm not a professional geographer, I'm not a humanitarian, I'm not a first responder. I'm just a guy that wants to help people and finds computers are an easy way for me to do that. We do have people within the organisation and people that we work with who are professional first responders. They are humanitarians, they are geographers. We have some incredibly technical people, but I think a lot of the people that get involved in HOT are sort of like myself. They maybe have 10, 15, half an hour spare a day, and they find computers straightforward and they want to help someone out. Okay, so into HOT and what we do. Our website, hot.openstreetmap.org, has this quote on the front page. HOT applies the principles of open source and open data sharing for humanitarian response and economic development. In a nutshell, that is it. Open source software, open data, specifically OpenStreetMap. We work on projects to do with response and development. We are, in brief terms, a membership-led organisation, so we have at present between 50 and 60 registered members. The members appoint the board is legally responsible for HOT. We're registered as a US not-for-profit, registered in Washington DC, so we're bound by DC laws. We're active across the globe in funded and unfunded projects. A lot of what I'll be talking about today is our unfunded response work, where effectively groups have come to us and they say we need some sort of mapping project, we need maps or we need data about a particular region, and we provide that. But a lot of that work is backed up by funded projects that we have in places like Indonesia, Haiti, West Africa. Those are slightly different. I'm not really going to talk about them today, but we do a lot of capacity building projects, a lot of planning and preparedness projects. And of course, at the bottom there, we're empowered by the volunteers. The membership is quite small, 60 odd people, that's fine. The volunteers, which number thousands, they're the people that really give us the strength to do what people ask us to do. So put briefly, when people ask me to describe what HOT is or what I'm spending my evenings, clicking about on a computer doing, basically HOT provide maps for first responders and humanitarian workers. The example I always give, which I'll talk through now and not really go into again, is the Haitian earthquake of 2010. So the earthquake hit Haiti early 2010, Port-au-Prince was devastated, and there was immediately a humanitarian disaster. Buildings flattened, people displaced. Aid workers from around the world rushed into Haiti and wanted to start distributing aid and taking care of people. When they got there, most of them found that they had no access to maps that described Haiti before the earthquake, and they certainly had no access to any maps that described Haiti following the earthquake. As the situation in Haiti developed, these so-called tent cities were turned up. People newly made homeless became resident in camps throughout Haiti. Cholera became endemic, and people started suffering again. At that point, our remit changed. We were no longer mapping earthquake affected buildings. We began mapping the camps. We began mapping clean water sources, things like that. So when people say, what do you do? On a broad scale, we do maps for people that need maps. We do have people physically on the ground, so I've spoken about some of this before. In Haiti, for example, we had a team of about half a dozen people for up to a year. We then worked on establishing a more long-term, sort of local-led initiative that had effectively more people on the ground. But in reality, that's a small part of what we do. We can only provide these maps for people with the support of our volunteers. So this is a brief list of some of the projects that we've worked on since our sort of beginnings back in 2009. These are all disaster response, apart from the Indonesian risk modelling, which again I won't really talk about because we didn't really, we didn't dig into the crowd so much with that one. But all the others, we have asked people to help us, and they have. A bit of an obvious slide perhaps, but I wanted to get across the fact that unfortunately disasters keep happening. Unfortunately our services continue to be requested. Every time we work on a project, we get we get good feedback, we get press, we get people interested. Unfortunately, another response requires our help, and we usually turn that into positive feedback and grow and grow. One of the really nice examples of this, I think, is mapgive. So mapgive, the US State Department has their Humanitarian Information Unit. They've set up an initiative called Imagery to the Crowd, mapgive.state.gov. Basically, they're saying to people, we can get high quality imagery pre and post disaster. We can get that to people. They can digitize this imagery, make maps from it, and help in disaster response. We are effectively, HOS are effectively the people, the organisation behind mapgive. Mapgive has people to source the imagery and to get people involved. When they come to produce the maps from that, they do it through us. I think that's a really nice sort of piece of recognition from the US State Department that they're happy to partner with us on this this exciting project. Okay, so that was Humanitarian OpenStreetMap Team, sort of as brief as I could do it. But I think it's really important to talk about what OpenStreetMap is, because OpenStreetMap is utterly fundamental to what we do. So you go to the OpenStreetMap website, openstreetmap.org, and you see a map that covers the entire world. Anyone can log in. Once you're logged in, anyone can edit this. It's a map that you can do what you want with. It doesn't quite fit the, the images are automatically scaled, so they don't often fit. This one doesn't, it's cropped off the bottom, but this is OpenStreetMap registered users. So every user is a person that can potentially contribute to the map. The right hand side is now, the left hand side is back in 2005, 2006. So we're up to almost 1.7 million registered users. The amount of people that actively contribute or have made an edit to the map is far less than 1.7 million. The amount of people that regularly contribute on a, say, monthly basis perhaps, is much less than that again. But the point is, we have a lot of potential users automatically registered, or already registered, sorry, and that number is growing as we go. So to describe OpenStreetMap, a lot of people say it's Wikipedia plus GPS equals OpenStreetMap. The idea being that just as anyone can go and edit a Wikipedia article, anyone can go and edit the map. The phrase I often use is that OpenStreetMap is Google Maps that anyone can edit and download. Really, I don't think either of those descriptions are actually very good. What we do is we collaboratively map the world. We produce a database of real life things. When it comes to OpenStreetMap, I don't really like the term crowdsourcing, to be honest. I think collaborative mapping sort of fits better. A database of real life things possibly sounds a little abstract, a little bit technical. Really, OpenStreetMap isn't particularly difficult. It's not particularly technical. You go to that website that I showed earlier, the openstreetmap.org. You zoom in to your place that you're interested in. You have a look around. If you have something to contribute to the map, you click edit. You are shown, if it's available, which it usually is, you're shown aerial imagery. So you see satellite imagery provided by Microsoft Bing. On top of that is the OpenStreetMap data. OpenStreetMap data is lines and points at its simplest. So you see the pictures, you see the data, you can click and edit that data. You can draw new lines, you can draw new points, you can edit existing things. You click save and it's in the database. I should have included a picture of that, but you just have to believe me, if you've not seen it, it's dead easy and you can get up and running on OpenStreetMap very quickly. The database side of it, you don't have to look at if you're not interested. The main reason I think OpenStreetMap is not like either Wikipedia or Google Maps is because of, say, experts versus consumers and inputs versus outputs. So personally myself, I read articles on Wikipedia a lot. I will Google a subject. The first result is always Wikipedia. You read it. I never click through deeper into Wikipedia and I never edit any pages. I only ever read the thing. And I think that has to do with being an expert on the topic. So I never feel, for example, that I am expert enough in a Wikipedia page to edit it. I never feel like I'm involved enough in the project to edit it. There's always someone sort of watching that page who knows more about it than I do. The beauty for me of OpenStreetMap is that everyone is an expert. If you know the location of your favourite restaurant or your favourite shop or the postcode of the house you live in or the speed limit on your street, you are an expert on those things. You are an expert on something that nobody else is. And I think that what we have to do with OpenStreetMap is try and get as many different people as possible just to provide that tiny little piece of information that perhaps only they know. If everyone did that, we would immediately have this massive resource that would be better than anything else. The second point, inputs versus outputs, is why I don't really think OpenStreetMap is much like Google Maps. So Google Maps, we've all been to the website, you go there, it's a very slick product, it does the routing really well, it does things like Street Map really well, and the expectation with Google Maps is that you will go to the Google Maps site and everything you want will be there and you'll use it and you'll be done. People go to OpenStreetMap and they can't do routing on the OpenStreetMap site, they can't do things like Street View. The search is a bit different from the Google search and they say, oh, this isn't comparable. The point I think is worth making is that OpenStreetMap isn't trying to be those things. The beauty of OpenStreetMap is because anyone can take the data, anyone can do what they want with it. If someone makes a great routing service to tell you how to drive to wherever or get the train to wherever, they can provide that on their own site. Whereas Wikipedia and Google Maps for me are read-only. For me, OpenStreetMap is pretty much write-only. I don't ever go there to consult the map. I only ever go there to add things that I found or things that I can trace from aerial imagery. I really like this website. It's openwhatevermap.org. What they do is they take, and I'm only just showing this to you because I like it really, because it's fun. They take the map view that you would see in OpenStreetMap, they split it into tiles, and each tile is a different rendering of the data. So it's just a really sort of clear way of showing that you can take one data source and you can make it look however you want. If you're so inclined, you can put that back into one website and show sort of a kaleidoscope of map data. Another one, just because I really like it. This is a map of Istanbul rendered from OpenStreetMap data, but they've not tried to be sort of cartographically useful. They've tried to show a map of the world that looks different and looks fun. And that's what I really like about OpenStreetMap. There's a creativity there, potentially, that you can go nuts with this stuff and you can do whatever you want. So you don't go and look at the boring openstreetmap.org website because it looks okay, but it doesn't look great. You go to a website like this and you see exactly the same data made to look fun. So OpenStreetMap is being used a lot of places in the world. Some of this is due to cost. So if you have a website and you get a certain number of page views a month and you have a map there, Google are going to say, you're giving us so many impressions a month, we want to be paid per hit. So a lot of these websites found themselves in the situation where they were having to pay for maps on their website. If you're going to be paying for maps on your website, do you want Google Maps that look like every other map, or do you want something that you can specify the look and feel, you can get it looking, you can have it displaying what you want it to display? So a lot of people have moved. So Foursquare, Pinterest, Flickr, Le Monde, the FT, the US National Park Service, they're some of my favourites. The LA Times has got a nice page. I think this is really important. The big websites are doing this. Big websites and big services are doing this sort of thing. They're arguably making money from OpenStreetMap, or they're at least saving money from OpenStreetMap, and people like me are contributing my spare time, effectively working for Le Monde and Evernote and the rest of it. But I think these websites, by using OpenStreetMap, they're building publicity on the project, they're giving it a legitimacy, they're really feeding into the ecosystem. I've snuck in cycle.travel there, which is a really nice website run by a guy just outside of Oxford, where he does cycling routes, cycling route finding on his website using OpenStreetMap data. And the point is, these big companies can use OpenStreetMap and they can get what they want out of it, but by doing so they improve the service for everyone else and make it possible for sites like cycle.travel to exist. I think that's a really positive thing. So just a couple of examples, just again because it looks nice. This is Pinterest, their specific rendering of data. The Financial Times, obviously the FT is pink, so the website's pink, so it makes sense that the maps on their website are pink. And the Los Angeles Times, they style their online maps to look like their print maps. This is a really nice example. It's a map of every fire station in LA City. The Times collected this data and wanted to run analysis on it. They were looking at response times to 911 calls. So they ran the analysis, but before doing so, they fed all the data they had on fire stations back into OpenStreetMap. So by running that story and displaying it on their website, anyone else that needs to know the location of every fire station in LA can thank the LA Times for providing that. Okay, so that again was quite a quick look, I guess, at OpenStreetMap. I'm getting through it a little bit quicker than planned, but hopefully no one minds. So looking now at Humanitarian OpenStreetMap Team, how we use OpenStreetMap and how we get people to contribute to it. So again, this is about inputs and outputs. The outputs are the free data that anyone can download. So anyone can go to openstreetmap.org and download the data for the world, or more likely a particular region. So if there's a disaster in Haiti, for example, anyone can go to OpenStreetMap, download the Haiti dataset, and they can do stuff with that data. They can make maps from it, they can load it onto a GPS. Likewise, anyone can follow a disaster or a current event in the news, and anyone can log onto the website and start contributing to it. So if you're reading about Iraq today, for example, you might want to log on and start tracing from aerial imagery cities in Iraq because you think that might be useful in the future. What HOT does is we have connections. We know people within the aid agencies that want our outputs, so we can have those outputs specified to us. And more importantly, we can try and herd the crowd into providing inputs required to meet those outputs. So again, the outputs I won't speak much about, but it's that input, it's that getting people to help where help is required that I'll talk more about in the talk. So like I say, we have people that deal with the outputs. We have humanitarians, we have GIS technicians, we have professional geographers that can liaise with the Red Cross, for example, and can provide them with the outputs they need. So some examples, this is the Haitian earthquake. That's a Garmin GPS loaded with OpenStreetMap data. So you're on the field in Haiti, you want to navigate yourself, you can use our data. This is a scene from the Philippines with basically people were landing in the airport and were being given these massive, whatever it is, A0 maps of our data. They would say, okay, I'm going to go work in Tacloban. Let's say, okay, here's the map of Tacloban. And the other output, just quickly, this is a project I was involved with in Indonesia, where we're looking at risk management and disaster preparedness. So here is Jakarta. This is the OpenStreetMap data for Jakarta loaded into a GIS program, QGIS. And there's a plugin running that says, in case, does it? Oh, it's kind of got on there, just about, but it says, okay, in the event of a flood in Jakarta, like the one in 2007, what buildings are going to be affected? The buildings all come from OpenStreetMap data. By matching that with data that we hold separately, we can say things like 863,000 people will be within 1 metre of water. They will need these supplies. We need to prepare this amount of stuff. So that's the outputs. The inputs is, I think the way we deal with the people that contribute to OpenStreetMap on the whole isn't particularly new or novel or innovative. We use a lot of tools that everyone else uses. Basically, it's about communication, documentation, and for mapping in particular, about task creation. So just as everyone else does, we use blog posts, email lists, social media, the OSM wiki. We rely on people talking about us in the press. We use Skype a lot, we use Gmail chat, that sort of thing. We don't particularly have any tools regarding communication that are new. We just try and make the most of what's available. The one specific, or the main used specific tool we have is to manage mapping tasks. So in Haiti, for example, we were asked to map Port-au-Prince. We had aerial imagery provided of the area, and we said to people, please go and map this. Everyone logged onto OpenStreetMap, they clicked edit, they could see the imagery, they could see the data. Of course, getting people to rush in like that is great if you draw something and you're the first person to click save, because that goes into the database. The next person that clicks save may have drawn an overlapping line, there may be data conflicts, there may be, well effectively that's it, there's going to be data conflicts. So we produce the task manager to get around this. So basically everyone's job is parceled up into a discrete square. You go and you edit your square, you can be pretty certain that you're not going to have any conflict with anyone else. So you visit our website, tasks.hotosm.org. It's presumed that you already have a OpenStreetMap account. You log in with your OpenStreetMap account, and it shows you a list of jobs available at the moment. So at the time, this is a screenshot of featured jobs. I don't know how many there is. There's usually about 10 featured jobs running at any one time. If you go to all jobs, there's quite a few. But this is effectively, people have asked us for assistance. They've said, I need a map of this town. We create a job that covers that area, and we say to people, please go map. So looking at the Pakistan example here, you click on the job, you just see a description of it. So you're talking there about who's asked for what they need, what you can do to help. The area sort of shown in blue is the area we're talking about. A grey square is a square that needs mapping. A red square is a square that's been done. A green square is a validated square, so that's a complete mapping task that someone else has gone back over and they've effectively approved. Some squares are bigger than others, or rather some are smaller than others. They all start off large and they get smaller. That's basically because within some areas there's nothing and it takes you 2 seconds to say there's nothing there, I've mapped it. Within some squares there's loads of stuff. If you're mapping every building, for example, you may find that your lunch break only gives you enough time to do a quarter of a square, so you can split that down. So you would click, for example, the instructions tab, and it asks you again, this example, map residential areas, map roads, map airfields, map water sources. A lot of the ones we do, we ask people to map buildings. Basically, people are going house to house and they want to know where every house in a particular area is. This one, it's not, it's roads. Okay, so then you would click the task tab and then you can select the task you want to do. So I've just clicked this task. You say you want to work on it. The links at the top there, JOSM, ID Editor and Potlatch 2, they're all OpenStreetMap editors. So once you've accepted your task, you would click on the editor that you wanted to use and the area is loaded up in front of you. Walking papers is effectively for printing the area onto a paper map that you could take out to the field with you. OSM and GPX are data exports of existing data. We do user reporting, so you can see some statistics. So you can see for this example, Steve Feldman has done A square, Mark Cuppet has done 58. And we do stats over time. So you can see from, what's that, early April to early June, how that's progressed. This works really well. I'll give you some case studies later, which I hope sort of make it look good. But it does work well, but it requires help from other people. So we have partners that provide the imagery that people trace from. We have people who take the data and export it and give it to other people. We have map renderings, so that example I showed you earlier of all the different ways the map can be shown, we have a specific humanitarian one that we will change to show what we're interested in. So if we need to be mapping wells or standing pipes, for example, we'll change that rendering to highlight wells and standing pipes. And we also have people help us with publicity. So rattling on to case studies, these are two recent case studies that I wanted to talk about because they, not necessarily because they're sort of the biggest or the grandest, but because they are examples of where we quickly activated and quickly got people interested in what we were doing and quickly provided the mapping products that we were asked to do. So for example, the Haitian earthquake is more of a talked about example because it was one of the first ones and it was enormous. The Indonesian work I've been doing, we managed to mix sort of crowdsourcing with local populations, again over a long period of time. But I've gone for these because they were the really, you've got 2 weeks, it was really snappy, and we did what we wanted to do. Apologies for the font kerning on this. It's done all the layout automatically based on the resolution, and it's squished it in effectively. Regardless, the 2014 Ebola crisis, we got an email to the hot mailing list on March 24th from Médecins Sans Frontières Switzerland and their partners CAR ONG, requesting maps of 3 specific areas in Guinea that they needed high quality maps, including every building in those towns. A day later, March 25th, I put a post on our blog. The tasks have been created by someone else, and we just had the links to them. I put a blog post saying, please go and do these. Imagery was purchased by CAR ONG. It was acquired from the Pleiades 1A satellite. Most of the mapping required for those 3 towns in Guinea was complete in 12 hours. So almost immediately as first responders had arrived on the ground, we had the data they had asked for. March 31st, Mapbox, who are they're partners of ours, they reported by that point 200 mappers had contributed 100,000 buildings and hundreds of miles of road. By April 11th, we had appeared in print in New Scientist, and April 15th, it was sort of towards the end of the project. By that point, we had 363 contributors, 1.65 million objects in OpenStreetMap. We had been working on imagery donated by Mapbox/Digital Globe and Airbus Defence and Space. By this point as well, we'd moved out of Guinea and we were into three countries. As an aside, Mapbox/Digital Globe are really exciting. They were in the news earlier this week. They're the first company to have license from the US government to do sub 30 centimetre imagery. I can't remember the resolution. Basically, Digital Globe have the license. They're the only company to release very high quality imagery into the public. And being a partner of ours, that's really exciting. In the future, we are going to have, or hopefully, we will have available the highest quality imagery sort of allowed by the US government. I don't have any pictures, I'm afraid, of the West African crisis. This one is more pictureful. The problem is we do these things and everyone is interested in doing the mapping and doing the work and fulfilling the requirements. It's only afterwards someone says, oh, I wish we'd taken a before and after shot of that town. So when you're there, you say, oh yeah, we mapped that in 12 hours. But then I've got no way of proving that to you. So apologies for the lack of pictures. The Philippines example is a bit more graphic. Okay, so this late 2013 Typhoon Haiyan or Yolanda, November 6th, we first identified it on our mailing list as something that was likely to become a project we were going to be working on. By this point, no one had asked us to do anything, but it was obvious that this was going to be a problem. We asked volunteers to map Tacloban from the available Bing imagery. Tacloban was going to be, that was where the storm was forecast to hit. Okay, November 8th, storm makes landfall in Tacloban, the strongest ever storm to hit land. November 10th, we partner with UN OCHA, the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, the American Red Cross and the US State Department again. Again, we're mapping various areas. Throughout this process, we're creating new tasks on the tasking manager based on the requests of these groups, and we're mapping areas. And 3 days later, post-disaster imagery of Tacloban is made available, and the job switches at that point. We're then asked to map the damage that's been caused. By November 15th, so 9 days after the initial call, we've had over 800 contributors, over 2 million changes to the map, and over 250,000 building maps. A day later, we have over 1,000 people getting involved. And by November 24th, when we're starting to wind down, we've got over 1,500 people have made changes to 4.5 million plus objects in OSM. The point of this one is it ramped up so quickly. I don't have the graphs in the slide, but if you're interested in the speed of how we reacted, go to Harry Wood. Check out his website. I think it's just harrywood.co.uk. He's got some slides he did recently where he graphed the amount of people contributing, and he compared that to the amount of people that were searching Google for the word typhoon. On our contributor graphs, it ramps up really quickly, dips slightly, goes up again, falls off, and then you have that long tail. The graphs that Harry's put together showed that the Google searching for the word typhoon follows exactly the same pattern. It ramps up quickly, falls off, then up again and down. So whether there's a correlation there between people perhaps hearing in the news about the typhoon, they're Googling it, they're coming to us and they're wanting to help. I don't know if that's true or not. It's just when you put the two graphs next to each other, you can see something's going on. But that's Google Harry Wood typhoon, you'll see that. A really nice point about the Yolanda activation was that mapping parties happened across the world. So people in cities got together. I think the hashtag on Twitter was something like Help the Philippines or Map the Philippines, and they just wanted to get involved. The really nice ones on here, there are some in African cities, Nairobi for example, where we have previously worked, established, got people interested in OpenStreetMap, we've left and they've wanted to continue helping. The really nice one is Tokyo. So we had a big activation for the Fukushima disaster in which a lot of people in the Philippines mapped areas of Japan. After the Tokyo mapping party, the organisers said, well, the guys in the Philippines helped us and we really wanted to help them back. So it's a really nice sort of community there, that OpenStreetMap community, where you help someone, they help you back. So some pictures. So every blue box on this is a task that was created in the tasking manager. So I think we had 23 over the course of 3 weeks. And you can see some of them, the one at the top of the image there, we're dealing with enormous areas, and we said to people, can you map these? Can you map these features within these areas? And they're pretty much, they're not all complete. You know, you get to a point where you get to sort of 98%, and there's some little squares that have got nothing in, and people don't bother with them because effectively those bits aren't needed. So they're not all finished completely, but we mapped those areas very quickly. This slightly scruffy image is change sets within the Philippines. So when you go to OpenStreetMap and save some data, it gets saved as a change set. These boxes show the bounding extents of those change sets. So every green box, someone was editing within that area. You know, I don't know how many there are, but basically people were doing a lot of mapping. Excuse me. So that is where we're at so far, and that is how we work. We get in contact with third-party responders, or they get in contact with us. They tell us their requirements, and we organise that through the blogs, through social media, and the mapping we organise through our task manager. Moving forward, I'm sure there's more we can be doing. I'm really interested in microtasking, which I'm sure everyone knows about. Effectively, more people doing less work. So we have over 1,000 people spending 15 minutes a go mapping a square for us. which is great. You know, hopefully you can extend that. But I'd also like 100,000 people spending a couple of seconds here or there doing something that's going to be useful. The other thing, at the moment, our volunteers provide mapping. They go on and they I don't know what you'd call it, they do mapping, and we ask them to digitize a square, and they do it. I wonder if there's something, if we should be getting people to do less mapping work, but otherwise useful work. So an example, for instance, was in Mali. We needed to map enormous swathes of Mali, and most of it is just desert. You can't be sort of producing a tasking manager task with 1 million squares and saying, please map this, when most of it, there's nothing to map. So we had a website set up where we were showing people images. You clicked a button if there was something in it. You clicked a different button if there's nothing. You could fire through these things. Most of them had nothing in it. You would just click no, 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 no. When it came to the tasking manager, you were presented only with squares that had something in. And the other example we had was with Hurricane Sandy. We had a lot of aerial imagery of that US East Coast, and we wanted to do sort of damage assessment. So we were giving people images, and you had to rate them 1 to 3. 1 was no damage, 3 was damage, 2 was a little bit, and we were passing that data on to our partners. We seem to do this sort of microtasking as an exception. Really interested in finding out how we could do more of it. We're not the only people thinking along these lines, so I'm sure everyone knows all about reCAPTCHA. Google at the top there originally used reCAPTCHA to digitize books. So there's 2 words, one of them they know, one of them they don't know. You type in both the words, and the works of the Bodleian Library, for example, gets digitized. They've now changed that to numbers. So again, one of these numbers they know, one of the numbers they don't know. The street numbers, the house numbers come from their street view. So effectively, if you sign up for a website and they ask you to do a CAPTCHA, you're digitizing their street view imagery. I wonder if there's something similar we could be doing. We do have a thing called remapGIVe, which aims to do something similar, and effectively, if you can get from one place to the other by road, you type in both the words. If you can't, you just type in one of them. It's really early. It's nothing to do with me. It's nothing to do with HOT either. It's done by some OpenStreetMap people. It's really early in its development, but it kind of works. It could kind of be good for us. It should be able to validate OpenStreetMap data or highlight a lack of data in a particular area. These things aren't perfect. I've been lying to Google, but I think we can still be playing with this, and we can still be trying to get something out of it. We've got a lot of other tasks which have nothing to do with maps or mapping that I wonder if we can sort of somehow get the crowd to help us with. So we have various people that deal with legal matters. They deal with, can we fly a UAV over Haiti, for example? They deal with health and safety of our paid staff in the field. They deal with communications on the press, software development funding. Really interested in if we can break any of these down into micro tasks. Micro funding would be easy. We've got a donate button on our website. You can donate a small amount of money. But how maybe can we look at getting people to get engaged with things like legal assistance? I have no idea. And this is something that, as an organisation, I think we really need more of. It's just how to do it, I don't know. So I've gone slightly over. So to sum up quickly, yeah, we're HOT. We use OpenStreetMap to produce mapping resources for people that ask for them. We have some techniques for dealing with the crowd that are novel to us, such as the tasking manager. We have a lot of techniques that aren't novel to us. We need to extend what we're doing, but also we need to keep sort of talking to people. We need to getting interested in what we're doing, and we need to sort of keep up the momentum of what's going on. And that's the end of my talk.
Thank you. It's very important and interesting work. We've got plenty of time if there are questions. Maybe I'd like to start. One of the things that comes up whenever we talk about doing disaster relief projects with the Zooniverse is people get incredibly obsessed with the idea of accurate data. You know, it's bad enough to make a mistake on Wikipedia if you're writing somebody's biography, but if there's going to be somebody in the field with a printed map, then the sense is that it has to be 100% accurate. What sort of accuracy do you get, and how does the system make sure that the data is good?
So it depends. Every case is different. OpenStreetMap itself isn't going to do any data validation or anything like that, so you can fill it with absolute junk. There are some automatic tools provided by third parties which we use to an extent. So you can do error checking, for example. You can look for simple, digitizing errors, overlapping buildings, for example, overlapping roads. But a lot of it is through the tasking manager, through the validation. So we're asking people, we've told them what the requirements are, and we're asking people to go and check other people's work. That's mainly done by people, more experienced, long-term contributors. We just get them to go over it. Maybe, for example, we could extend the tasking manager to include, to flag up areas that have a lot of problems in them, but a lot of it isn't machine identifiable. So if you simply trace a road that doesn't exist and you say that's a main road there and it's a field, the software's never going to work that out. You need a human to look at it and say no. But that's sort of all about that sort of feedback and communication. Yeah, is very important.
Questions from the audience? There's a mic, so we'll take a question here, please. Thanks.
Hi, thanks for the inspiring presentation. My name is Pamela Steele. I'm ex-humanitarian and development sector practitioner. I now run a management consultancy here in Oxford, focusing on the same area. I had two or three questions for you. One is how does your project compare with the Ushahidi project, which came out as a result of the post-election violence in Kenya, which has been picked up by many of the humanitarian organizations for mapping disaster zones? One. Two, how much of your emergency preparedness and recovery project that you talked about is integrated within the national disaster risk reduction programs? Of course, there's a tendency to run parallel programs or simply parachute in and do things without the national government's knowledge, and which tends to create problems. The third one is how much of your approach, that everything that you do fall within the humanitarian principles. We're talking of mapping zones in a disaster situation, which is important when a disaster strikes, but how much of the vulnerable people exposed, their security, their privacy, when it comes to protecting their integrity and dignity. And lastly, I come from the supply chain background, and normally when disasters strike, we may know when it's going to strike, where probably it's going to hit, but getting the supplies out to people affected is often the challenge. How much is your technology able to improve efficiency in supply chain so that we get help out faster, and make sure that the taxpayers' money is effective? Thank you.
Plenty of questions.
So first question, Ushahidi, how do we sort of relate to them? So as you say, Ushahidi was born out of post-election violence in Kenya. Ushahidi, I would see them as a partner of ourselves. They, for example, the mapping they use is often OpenStreetMap. It's often derived from the work we've done. Ushahidi map or rather we map things that exist in the physical world. So we map infrastructure and buildings and water sources. You Shahidi map events that have happened. So we're complementary, I think, because we map the place and they map the actions. There's not really much overlap between us other than that we work towards sort of similar goals. The second question was
about overlap with national infrastructures like that exists already.
How well are you linked with?
Yep. So the project I worked on, for example, is Indonesia. In Indonesia, we were funded by AusAid, the Australian Overseas Aid Agency, and we were working directly with the Indonesian National Mapping Agency, BIG, and the regional disaster management organisations. So a lot of the work we were doing there was training, and we were training these local government workers. So we were working within the established disaster response sort of framework. We were working with local populations, and we were as embedded as we could be.
And then the other thing was just about sort of the humanitarian principles, so the privacy of the people who are in these areas. So once there's been mapping,
yeah.
I think the issue is about what happens.
That goes behind it, so that you don't go out mapping the buildings and then you come in the night and bomb them again because you know where they are or whatever ethics, humanitarian principles that govern how you actually intervene in these situations. Because we've seen so many briefcase aid organizations, briefcase NGOs, and Haiti was a classic example, which attracted over how many thousands of aid of NGOs who came from Norway, crowding the place, causing chaos, and doing harm that we know that they came to do. So how well are you integrated within the humanitarian framework? You mentioned OCHA, you mentioned some useful names there, and being funded by AusAid or USIT. I'm just trying to be the voice of the voiceless.
Yep. You know? So obviously privacy is one of the issues we take very seriously, and we never want to be creating maps that are going to harm people. A lot of the time, we haven't had specific issues. For example, a lot of the imagery we deal with is already public, so we're copying from something that's already publicly available. So the Haiti example, for example, I mentioned briefly talking about flying UAVs in Haiti. There was a lot of pressure within the organisation to be flying these things over certain areas and producing maps from it. One of the reasons that I personally couldn't give my support to that was because of this issue of privacy. We're not a imagery producer, we're an imagery consumer, so I couldn't be saying to people, yeah, well, let's go take pictures 10 foot above people's houses. So it's always in the back of our mind. We recently worked in Syria, where a lot of people were speaking to me about their reluctance to get involved, because they were saying that by producing maps of Syria, we could effectively be mapping areas that we could be providing maps to be used by aggressive forces on either side. My point always was, if you're worried about the data that you're putting into an OpenStreetMap that could be used to harm people, just don't do it. I'd much rather see a map that had holes on it or that was incomplete than a map that could be used to hurt people. The other point about Syria was both sides in Syria have demonstrated that they're perfectly able to cause a lot of suffering and misery without needing our maps. They know how to do that already. Our maps were for humanitarian workers, and I don't think we had any problems there mapping those areas.
And I'm not criticizing, I just want to make sure that with the approach you apply, that there's
It's an important point. I'm sure we'll come back to it. Let's hear from somebody else. Are there more questions? There were some hands. Yeah, just back there.
Thank you. 2 questions. Have you ever worked with the ECHO, the European Commission Humanitarian Office? First question. Second one is, have you ever had problems with mapping areas that are normally blank on open data available? Because if you look at Google Maps, there are parts of the world which basically are more or less blank for various security reasons.
So you're talking about places, not holes in the mapping, not places that haven't been mapped, but places that have been deliberately left blank.
Yeah.
Okay, so the first question, yes, we have partnered with them. I haven't personally been involved, so I couldn't sort of give you any useful insight into how that went. And yeah, mapping sort of blank spaces, a lot of the work we do, we're the first people to produce OpenStreetMap maps of that area. So it's a blank sheet, but we have the imagery. If we don't have the imagery, we're very good at sourcing it. We've not really dealt with any areas that there was, say, a restriction on imagery. We've not dealt with any, say, sensitive military sites or anything like that where you cannot get decent imagery. Everywhere that we've worked, if the imagery wasn't there available on Bing already, we've managed to have it provided to us.
So the sensitive sites would be filtered at the level of the imaging companies?
Yeah, it depends on the imagery. So Digital Globe, who I mentioned earlier, they don't do any filtering. Some sites, they blur out army bases in India, for example. They blur out the White House. Digital Globe don't do any of that. So the imagery we get of an area is always good, but we've never come into a situation that sort of covered the Syria example. We do trace military installations and things like that, but we've never had anyone come to us and say, you can't deal with this area, you can't map that area.
Anyone else? Yeah. Just wait for the mic, because I know there are people watching at home.
Thanks very much for an interesting presentation, and I'm very novice in this area, but I just wondered, with all your efforts in the disaster responses, have you ever tried to evaluate the impact that your maps have in changing things for people during that response? Have you any research data that's measured the fact that the response was better following access to your maps than not having the access to them?
Yeah, that's a really good point. Evaluating what we do and trying to measure that in a way that's sort of useful to us and then comparable to other approaches or the next time we do it would be really good, but it's very difficult. So a lot of these situations, we get really good feedback from our partners. So people say, using those handheld GPSs in Haiti, with the maps on, someone said to us, oh, that was literally a lifesaver. The printed maps in the Philippines, they get a really good response. I don't know how we would compare that to what the situation would be like if we hadn't dealt with those people. One thing we do look at is trying to build a presence in an area, so after we've left. So after the initial mappers have gone to the country and left, after initial aid workers have left, we always try and build up a local presence so that this data that we effectively provide can be maintained and kept up to date and continue being useful. So we do have more work on measuring that community building and that long-term presence. But like I was saying, when we get there, a lot of the time we don't even do before and after shots of the city. We get there, there's such a mad rush to do it, that measuring the impact of it is nearly impossible, unfortunately.
Yeah, just here.
Again, yeah, thank you very much. Very interesting. Excuse my naivety, though, because I'm new to this area. When you talk about the mappers, are they individuals in the countries? Are they the crowd? I guess I need to...
No, sorry, I confused the terms there when I answered that last question. Most of the people, most of our mappers are people sat either at home or at work doing this stuff remotely. For a particular big project, we would send a small group of people to the country in question. So in Haiti, for example, we had, I don't know, 2,000 mappers. 1,990 of them were at home. The other 10 were in the country, dealing specifically with aid agencies that had requests.
So it's people in countries like the UK who are looking at Google, I don't know.
Exactly.
But it's not actually local people who are able to provide.
No, and this is something we could perhaps work more on, but no, the majority of the work is done by people from Oxford, for example, from wherever they are in the world, contributing. They're looking at aerial photos and they're mapping based on that. The insight that we get from local people is, of course, invaluable. The question is how to get that within a disaster situation. So the Indonesia example, for example, we had something like 500,000 buildings mapped by people not in Indonesia. And then I went to the city of Padang and worked with locals on collecting the data to add to that. So they had 500,000 buildings mapped, and then we went around and we recorded the materials they were constructed from and what the roofs are made of and things like that. So yes, the majority of our work is out of country. It would be really interesting to find out how we could get locals involved. To be honest, the Horn of Africa example, we imported a lot of data that was public domain data. We imported it straight into OpenStreetMap, and people said to us, they said, oh, you can't do that because anyone working on OpenStreetMap in Somalia is going to be put off by that. You've done all the work. They're not going to be interested anymore in OpenStreetMap. They're not going to be interested in contributing their time. And the point was, well, actually, I think a lot of the people suffering in Somalia don't care about OpenStreetMap. You know, they are interested in the products. So there's a balance, but at the moment it's all 99% remote.
Yeah, please. Just the same question.
Sorry.
Yeah, thanks.
I don't work in the humanitarian aid area, but coming from the health perspective, I think of other epidemics, if you like. Say, for example, one could say sexual violence in India at the moment. Just trying to think, have people been using this sort of process to look at high-risk areas around sexual violence, for example?
So the example mentioned earlier of Ushahidi is has been used many times for mapping sexual violence, for example, mapping other sorts of violence. So there was an example in Egypt, for example, where they were mapping sexual violence in Egypt on Ushahidi. That's all sort of crowd contributed. People in the country either submit reports themselves and end up on the map, or people go through the newspapers, for example, go through social media and submit reports from there. So we deal with the physical world.
I guess, yes, no, but around that area, I think people are looking at, is there infrastructure that may be associated with greater risks? So are certain parts, it's the infrastructure related to that.
So we're not doing that at the moment, but we could do. The whole point is that the data being open, we could combine our open geodata with some reports. The two could be mashed up, and we could. That's something we could be doing.
And presumably, people or organisations who are interested in that could propose a task to through your system and could ask for specific. I think that's one of the things that struck me was the openness, not just of the data, but of that platform for requesters. So I think that's very important. We probably got, just behind you.
Hi, thanks, very interesting talk. I just wonder how much this mapping platform can be used for searching. So let's say an airline has lost an airplane or something, so get a bunch of satellite images, and then you can crowdsource the job.
Yeah, so with the recent airline, the Malaysian Airlines, that was exactly what happened. So Digital Globe, who I've mentioned a couple of times already, they tasked a number of their satellites to get a lot of high resolution data, and they were doing a micro task from that. Click a photo, if there's a plane in it, click yes, if not, click no. It didn't turn up anything, unfortunately, just because the areas are so huge, but that sort of thing is definitely possible.
Can I actually respond
Yeah,
to that?
sorry, yeah.
So, a couple years ago, there was a plane crash in the States. I forget who it was. I think it was some either very rich person or somebody who had a background in computer science. And they did, it was around Nevada, I think, and it was a small plane that this guy was flying. It crashed. They actually put up a lot of the maps onto Google Earth, I think it was at the time, and people were searching through it. Part of the problem there was they discovered afterwards, they eventually found the plane, they eventually were able to take aerial photos of the crash site. It sort of looked nothing like what people were sort of looking for with the crash. And so this is sort of part of the problem with something like that, is you really need to have better experts to be able to look at this. I don't think when it comes to something like looking for plane crashes, that isn't something that you can sort of open up to the public quite as much. You need to have some slightly better informed people looking at it.
It's also a design. I mean, the other part of that story was that they did find a plane crash, but it was from the 1960s. So they found the wrong plane. And there have been other examples. It's something our team are looking at, because we do crowdsourcing with images. And sort of, but Greg's right that it's about directing attention and matching that to what experts come out. So hopefully we'll have, perhaps in collaboration, we can put a platform together.
Within our example, for example, we say map these buildings. In Indonesia, buildings are rectangular square things with slopey roofs, and everyone knows what that looks like. In some parts of West Africa, they were round huts. So talking about experts again, I said everyone's an expert on their street. In some cases, you do have to tell people what they're looking for, and we do that basically. Yeah.
Any more? Nope. Okay, well, thank you for such an interesting and wide-ranging set of questions. I think it's an excellent note to end on. I should remind you and everyone who's watching that the other talks in the series, and indeed this one very shortly, are on the Oxford Martin School website at oxfordmartin.ox.ac.uk, and there will be new and exciting seminars when we return from the summer break. But in the meantime, let's thank Joseph once again.
Thank you.